Picture this. An Athenian councillor named Lycidas stands up in a crowded assembly on the island of Salamis. He raises his hand and makes what seems like a logical suggestion. Maybe we should listen to the Persian peace offer. The crowd doesn't boo, they don't argue, they don't vote him down. Instead, the other councillors surround him and stone him to death right there on the assembly floor. But it doesn't end there. The women of Athens, hearing the commotion, rush to Lycidas's house, drag his wife and children into the street, and stone them to death too. This isn't a scene from some ancient legend. This was the brutal reality of 479 BC. The Greeks were done with diplomacy. They were traumatized, homeless, and bloodthirsty for revenge. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae were dead. Athens lay in ashes, and the only language anyone understood anymore was violence. This savage, no-compromise mindset sets the stage for the final showdown, the Battle of Plataea, the story of how 10,000 Spartans and their allies stopped being victims and became butchers. Before diving into this forgotten tale of vengeance and survival, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths behind history's most brutal moments, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please, comment below to let me know where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories of violence and redemption together from different corners of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the past. That execution of Lycidas proves one thing. The Greeks were desperate. King Xerxes had returned to Persia, yes, but the threat hadn't left with him. He'd left behind General Mardonius, a man far more dangerous than the king himself. Mardonius wasn't some tourist here to sightsee. He was a predator. He sat in the plains of Boeotia with 300,000 of the Persian Empire's deadliest killers, not the conscripted rabble that Xerxes had brought, but the elite, the immortals, the Saka horse archers, the veterans who had already broken the Spartan line at Thermopylae. He was effectively holding a knife to the throat of all Greece, and just to prove he wasn't going anywhere, Mardonius burned Athens a second time. Anything still standing after the first invasion, walls, homes, temples, he tore down, smashed, or set ablaze. His message was crystal clear. I am still here. The Athenians, now living as refugees scattered across the islands, had reached their absolute breaking point. They sent runners to Sparta with a message that wasn't a plea for help. It was a threat. They told the Spartan ephors point blank, if you don't march north right now, the Athenian navy joins Persia, and when that happens, your precious walls won't save you. It was the wake-up call of the century. The Spartans had been dragging their feet, hiding behind the Isthmus of Corinth, hoping somehow the problem would just go away. But faced with the prospect of a Persian-Athenian alliance, Persia's land army combined with Athens' naval dominance, the Spartan War Machine finally kicked into gear. And when Sparta decides to move, the ground shakes. In a single night, the ephors issued a mobilization order that defies belief. They didn't just send a small vanguard, they emptied the entire city. 5,000 Spartiates, the elite of the elite, suited up for war. But here's the rare logistical detail that shows the true scale of their intent. They brought the slaves. For every single Spartan warrior, 7 helot slaves were armed and ordered to march. That's 35,000 conscripted servants marching to war alongside their masters, plus another 5,000 provincial troops. A massive column of 45,000 men vanished from the Peloponnese before sunrise. When the Athenian envoys woke up the next morning, ready to scream at the Spartan leadership, the ephors simply looked at the sun and said, "You can stop shouting. The army is already at the border. The hunt has begun." While the Spartans were marching north, kicking up dust and terror in equal measure, let's be clear about what they were marching toward. Because in pop culture, the Persians are often depicted as a mindless horde, a swarm of unskilled slaves driven by whips and fear. That's propaganda, pure and simple. The army General Mardonius kept in Greece was nothing like the bloated parade force Xerxes had brought with him the year before. Mardonius had trimmed the fat. He'd sent the conscripts home, the farmers and tradesmen who'd been dragged from their villages and handed a spear. What remained was a lean, mean, professional killing machine of 300,000 men. These were the immortals, the heavy infantry who had already broken the Spartan line at Thermopylae. These were the Saka horse archers from the Central Asian steppes, men who could put an arrow through a greave slit while riding at full gallop. Mardonius wasn't relying on numbers alone, he was relying on speed, mobility, and superior tactical flexibility. When his scouts reported that the Spartans had finally left the Peloponnese, Mardonius didn't panic. He smiled. This was exactly what he wanted. He knew he couldn't fight the heavy Greek hoplites in the narrow streets and mountain passes. That would be suicide. He needed room to maneuver, open ground where his cavalry could dance circles around the slow-moving phalanx. So he gave the order to evacuate Athens, but not before delivering one final insult. He ordered the city razed to the ground. Anything that was still standing after the first invasion, walls, houses, temples, was pulled down, smashed, or burned. He turned Athens into a graveyard of broken stone, leaving the Greeks nothing to return to but ash and rubble. It was a scorched earth policy designed to break their hearts before the battle even started. The message was unmistakable. I am still here, and I'm not going anywhere. The Athenians, watching their city burn for a second time from refugee camps scattered across the islands, had finally had enough. They weren't just angry anymore, they were calculating. They understood leverage. They sent runners sprinting to Sparta, not with a plea, but with a weapon. The message was simple and devastating. If you don't march north right now, we're done waiting. The Athenian navy, the fleet that saved Greece at Salamis, joins Persia. And when we do, your walls at the isthmus won't mean a damn thing. It wasn't a request for help. It was an ultimatum. It was Athens holding a loaded gun to Sparta's head and cocking the hammer. The Spartans had been stalling, hoping the problem would somehow solve itself, hiding behind their fortifications like turtles in a shell. But this was the nightmare scenario. A Persian-Athenian alliance would mean Persia's unstoppable land army combined with Athens' naval supremacy. Greece would be finished, and Sparta would be surrounded. The ephors looked at each other across the council chamber and knew they were out of time. The wake-up call had arrived, and it was screaming. In a single night, the ephors issued a mobilization order that defies belief. They didn't just send a vanguard, they emptied the city. 5,000 Spartiates, the elite of the elite, suited up for war. But here's the detail that shows the scale of their intent. They brought the slaves. For every single Spartan warrior, 7 helot slaves were armed and ordered to march. That's 35,000 conscripted servants suddenly transformed into soldiers. Add 5,000 provincial troops, and you've got 45,000 men vanishing from the Peloponnese before sunrise. When the Athenian envoys woke up the next morning, the ephors simply said, "You can stop shouting. The army is already at the border. The hunt has begun." While the Spartans marched north, Mardonius was already making his move. This is where we need to appreciate his tactical genius. He withdrew his forces to Boeotia, near the city of Thebes. Then he chose his killing field with the precision of a chess grandmaster, the flat, open plains of Plataea along the Asopus River. Why there? Because the Greek phalanx had one fatal flaw. It was slow. An unstoppable wall of bronze, yes, but it turned like a battleship. On flat ground, Mardonius' cavalry could dance around them, flank them, and pepper them with arrows until they broke. He didn't just pitch tents. He built a fortress, a massive fortified stockade, a square mile of wooden walls and towers, creating a secure base of operations. He effectively constructed a city of war in the middle of a field and sat back, waiting for the Greeks to walk into the slaughterhouse, and they almost did. The allied Greek army, now swelling with reinforcements from every city-state that wasn't collaborating with Persia, arrived at the southern edge of the plain. They looked down from the foothills of Mount Cithaeron and saw the ocean of Persian tents stretching to the horizon. They saw the glittering armor of the immortals and the thousands of horses grazing by the river. And the Greek commanders, led by the Spartan regent Pausanias, did the only smart thing they could do. They stopped. They refused to descend onto the plain. They hugged the rocky slopes of the mountain where the Persian cavalry couldn't reach them, where the terrain negated Mardonius's greatest advantage. It became a high-stakes staring contest. Mardonius down in the valley with his fortified camp, Pausanias up on the ridge with his bronze-clad warriors, neither willing to give the other the advantage. Days passed. The tension mounted like a drawn bow. Mardonius grew impatient. He hadn't stayed in Greece to look at Spartans. He'd stayed to kill them. Mardonius decided to test their resolve. He sent his cavalry commander, a man named Massacred. This guy deserves his own movie. He was the most popular man in the Persian army, a giant who rode a Nisaean stallion with a bridle made of solid gold. His armor was so elaborate that men whispered he was invincible. He led cavalry right up the slopes to harass the Greek lines, and what followed was pure humiliation. They rode in circles, hooting, jeering, raining arrows down on the exposed Greek infantry. They called the Spartans cowards for hiding in the hills. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and it was working. The Greeks were taking casualties, unable to strike back against these hit-and-run tactics. The Megarians, a contingent of Greek allies holding an exposed position, were pinned down and on the verge of routing. They sent a desperate message to Pausanias: "Send help, or we leave." Pausanias looked around at his commanders. Who would volunteer to go down and fight cavalry on open ground? It was a suicide mission, but a group of 300 Athenians stepped forward, an echo of the 300 Spartans, a deliberate symbolism that wasn't lost on anyone. They rushed down to support the Megarians, bringing archers of their own. In the chaotic skirmish that followed, luck intervened. An arrow struck Massacred's stallion in the flank. The beast reared, throwing the commander to the ground. The moment he hit the dirt, the Athenians swarmed him. But here's the detail that makes this real. They couldn't kill him. His armor was impenetrable. They stabbed, hacked, nothing worked. Massacred fought back from the ground, and for a moment it looked like he might survive. Until an Athenian got smart. Instead of going for the body, he went for the face. He drove his spear through the eye slit. The Persian commander went still. The effect on both armies was instantaneous. The Persian cavalry, seeing their beloved commander dead, fell back in shock. They'd lost more than a tactician. They'd lost a hero, the man they believed couldn't be killed. The Greeks, meanwhile, erupted in celebration. They'd drawn first blood against the invincible Persians. Pausanias, recognizing the psychological value of the moment, ordered Massacred's body displayed. They paraded it along the Greek lines so every man could see. The Persians bleed. They die. They're not gods. More importantly, Pausanias used the morale boost to reposition his forces. He moved them to better defensive ground, higher up the slopes, closer to water sources. It was a masterclass in tactical flexibility. Turn a small victory into a strategic advantage. The staring contest continued. But now the Greeks had hope. They'd proven they could hurt the Persians. And Mardonius, watching from his camp below, realized this wasn't going to be the easy slaughter he'd anticipated. Days passed. The armies sat staring at each other, neither willing to give ground. But Mardonius was getting impatient. He hadn't stayed in Greece to play staring contests. If the Greeks wouldn't come down to fight, he'd force them down. He sent cavalry on a different mission, strike at something the Greeks couldn't live without, the Gargantuan spring, the only water source accessible from their ridge position. 110,000 men don't last long without water, especially in August heat with bronze armor baking in the sun. The Persian cavalry rode straight to the spring under cover of darkness. They didn't just block it or guard it, they destroyed it. They dumped dead horses into the water, fouled it with waste, and choked the flow with debris. By morning, the Greeks' only lifeline was gone. It was asymmetric warfare at its most brutal. You can't drink from a corpse-filled spring, and you can't fight without water. Pausanias looked at his options, and they were all terrible. Stay here and watch his army die of thirst within days. Unthinkable. Attack down onto the plain in desperation, exactly what Mardonius wanted. Suicide. There was only one choice left, and it was the riskiest move possible. Retreat at night to a new position closer to Plataea city, where fresh water sources existed. Now, here's why this was borderline insane. Night marches are chaotic even with professionals. Tens of thousands moving in darkness, trying to maintain formation, trying to reach a rendezvous point they can barely see. And most of these men weren't professionals. They were farmers and merchants who'd picked up spears. They'd never trained for complex nighttime maneuvers, but what choice did they have? Pausanias issued the order. The Greek army would withdraw under cover of darkness, reposition to higher ground near the city, and hoped they could complete the movement before the Persians realized what was happening. If they got caught in the open during the march, scattered and out of formation, it would be a massacre. The entire Allied force could be destroyed before dawn. The risk wasn't just tactical, it was existential. This was the army that stood between Persia and total conquest of Greece. If this night march fell apart, if the men panicked or got lost or broke formation, there would be no second chance. No reinforcements were coming. The Athenian navy couldn't fight on land. This was it. As the sun set and the Greeks began their dangerous withdrawal, Mardonius sat in his tent, studying reports from his scouts. He was patient, he was methodical, and he was about to get exactly the opportunity he'd been waiting for. The Greeks, desperate and on the move, about to hand him victory through their own desperation. The water had run red with horseblood. Soon, it would run red with something else entirely. The night retreat became exactly the nightmare Pausanias feared. Men stumbled through darkness, tripping over unseen rocks, losing track of their units. Careful formations dissolved. Units got separated. Some moved too fast, others too slow. The Greek army was coming apart, and then it got worse. A Spartan commander named Amompharetus refused to move. He planted his unit on the ridge and declared he wasn't retreating from Persians. Classic Spartan stubbornness turned catastrophic. Pausanias tried to reason with him. Amompharetus wouldn't budge. He created a dangerous split just when unity was everything. Pausanias faced an impossible choice. Stay and convince this fool, or continue and leave men behind. Dawn was coming. He kept moving, hoping Amompharetus would follow. He didn't. Meanwhile, the Athenians, following the retreat plan, actually made it to the rendezvous point. They arrived in the darkness, exhausted and thirsty, and waited, and waited. The Spartans didn't show. The other contingents were scattered across the countryside. The allied Greek army, which was supposed to regroup in a strong defensive position, was instead splintered into isolated groups with no idea where anyone else was. By dawn, the situation was catastrophic. The Greek army was scattered across miles of terrain, exhausted from marching all night, completely out of formation, and vulnerable in ways that would make any military commander wake up screaming. Some units were still moving. Others had stopped to rest. Amompharetus and his stubborn Spartans were still on the original ridge. It was every tactician's worst nightmare made real. Persian scouts, who'd been shadowing the retreat all night, rode back to Mardonius with reports that must have seemed too good to be true. The Greeks were running. They were scattered. They were disorganized. They looked defeated. This wasn't a tactical withdrawal. This looked like a rout, an army falling apart in panic. Mardonius read the reports and saw his moment. After all the waiting, all the careful positioning, the Greeks had just handed him victory. They were out in the open, fragmented, exhausted. His cavalry could tear through them. His immortals could roll over the scattered units before they had time to regroup. This was the slaughter he'd been waiting for. He gave the order immediately. The entire Persian army would attack at dawn. No waiting, no hesitation. The Greeks were broken. Now was the time to finish them. As the first light of morning broke over the plains of Plataea, the Persian war machine began to move, and the scattered, exhausted Greeks, still trying to figure out where everyone was, looked up to see an ocean of armor and horses rolling toward them like a tsunami. The hunt had become a massacre, or so it seemed. The Persian cavalry hit the scattered Spartan units like a hammer, expecting them to shatter. They didn't. Even exhausted, even out of position, even caught at their most vulnerable moment, the Spartans were still Spartans. They formed up. The phalanx took shape, not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough. Shields locked, spears leveled. What looked like panic from a distance became a wall of bronze up close. Mardonius, watching from his position, couldn't believe it. These men should be broken. They'd marched all night, had no water, were separated from allies, yet they stood firm. He committed his immortals, the Persian elite. If cavalry couldn't break them, his shock troops would. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a meat grinder. The immortals crashed into the Spartan phalanx, and the pushing match began. Bronze shields grinding against wicker shields, spear points jabbing through the gaps, trying to find flesh. Men screaming, grunting, dying on their feet because there was no room to fall. The front ranks shoved, with everything they had, trying to break the opposing line through pure force. The Persians had numbers, momentum, fresh troops. But the Spartans had training, every drill, every brutal lesson from the Agog kicking in, lock shields, hold the line, don't break. Persian arrows rained down, but at this range, with men packed so tight, the shots that hit shields outnumbered the ones that found flesh. The Spartans kept grinding forward, inches at a time, bronze pushing back wicker. It was exhausting, brutal, intimate violence. You could smell the man trying to kill you. You could see his eyes through his helmet. Mardonius, realizing his attack was stalling, did what great commanders do. He led from the front. He mounted his white horse and rode into the thick of the fighting, surrounded by his personal guard of 1,000 elite warriors. It was meant to inspire his men, to show them their general wouldn't ask them to die where he wouldn't go himself. But it also made him a target. The Greeks saw him. The white horse, the ornate armor, the bodyguards, it was obvious who he was. They shifted their entire focus. Kill the general, break the snake's head. In the chaos of the melee, someone, history doesn't record who, just that it was a Spartan, hurled a rock, not a spear, not an arrow, a rock. It struck Mardonius in the skull with enough force to crack bone. The Persian general fell from his horse dead before he hit the ground. The effect was instantaneous. His elite guard tried to protect his body, but they were surrounded, overwhelmed, cut down. The Persian center, seeing their commander fall, broke. Not retreated, broke. Panic spread through the ranks like wildfire. The unstoppable Persian army turned and ran. The phalanx had held, and Mardonius, who'd come to finish Greece, died in the dirt he'd chosen for their grave. The Persians ran, not in formation, in pure panic, streaming back toward their fortified camp. The Greeks, tasting blood, pursued like wolves chasing prey. The Persians reached their stockade and tried to make a stand. The walls would save them. They were wrong. The Greeks didn't stop. They went straight through. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. Greek hoplites tore through the wooden walls like they were made of paper. The Persians, already demoralized by their general's death, trapped inside their own fortress, had nowhere to run. The Greeks poured in and killed everything that moved. Men who tried to surrender were cut down. Men who tried to fight were overwhelmed. Men who tried to flee hit the walls of their own stockade and died there, trapped like animals. The numbers tell the story. Of the 300,000 Persians who'd occupied Greece, only 40,000 escaped the slaughter at Plataea. The rest, 260,000 men, died in the battle or the rout that followed. Compare that to Greek casualties, around 10,000. It wasn't a victory, it was an extermination. When the killing stopped, the Greeks walked through the Persian camp and discovered a different kind of battlefield. Not an austere military camp, a city of luxury, golden plates, silver cups, embroidered silk tents, fine wines, palace furniture, and enslaved women from across the empire. The Greeks freed them. A small mercy, a reversal of the fate Persians had planned for Greek cities. Pausanias walked through this opulence, taking it all in. Then he did something that would echo through history. He ordered the Persian cooks, the ones who'd survived, to prepare a feast exactly as they would have for Mardonius. The full spread, every delicacy, every luxury. He also ordered a Spartan meal prepared, the infamous black broth, that disgusting lentil soup so unappetizing that a visitor once joked, "Now I understand why Spartans are not afraid to die." He placed the two meals side by side. On the left, the culinary height of the greatest empire on earth, roasted meats, exotic fruits, delicate pastries. On the right, a bowl of brown sludge that looked like something you'd feed to prisoners. He called his commanders into the tent and pointed to the contrast. "Men of Greece," he said, "I brought you here to show you the folly of the leader of the Medes. Look at how he lived. He had all of this luxury, yet he came here to rob us, who have so little." The Greeks laughed. It became the propaganda image that would define Western identity for centuries: East versus West, luxury versus austerity, decadence versus discipline. But standing there, staring at that gold, something shifted in Pausanias. The seeds of his own destruction were being planted right there, amid the laughter and the loot. It was a moment of profound irony. Standing in Mardonius' captured tent, Pausanias gestured at the spread before them. The Persian feast glittered, roasted meats glazed with honey, pomegranates, wine aged in amphorae worth a fortune. Next to it sat the Spartan meal, black broth so disgusting a visitor once said, "Now I understand why Spartans are not afraid to die." Pausanias laughed, a genuine booming laugh that filled the tent. "Men of Greece," he declared, "look at this madness. The Persians had everything, every luxury a man could want, and they came here to take from us, who have nothing but rocks and discipline." His commanders laughed with him. The perfect propaganda moment, the narrative that would define Western civilization for 2,000 years. East versus West, decadence versus virtue, luxury versus freedom. But here's the tragedy. Pausanias wasn't mocking the luxury because he hated it. He mocked it because he wanted it. As he laughed, playing the incorruptible Spartan, something inside him was breaking. The poison was working. And that same day, history swears this is true, though it seems too perfect to be real. Across the Aegean Sea, the Greek fleet launched an amphibious assault on the Persian remnants at Mycale. They burned the Persian ships, slaughtered the garrison, and ended the Persian naval threat in a single stroke. 2 crushing victories on the same day. The Persian wars were over. Xerxes had no army left in Europe and no navy to bring one. The West was saved. Greece was free. It should have been a clean ending, a pure triumph. But history doesn't do clean endings. The alliance between Sparta and Athens was always temporary, a wolf and a shark agreeing to hunt together. Once the prey was dead, they looked at each other with new eyes. Athens, flush with confidence from their naval victories, returned home and built an empire. They formed the Delian League, demanding tribute from smaller islands, taking the freedom they'd fought for and monetizing it. The golden age of Athens was built on the reputation earned at Plataea, funded by what was essentially protection money. And Pausanias, he returned to Sparta a hero, the man who'd saved Greece, the commander who'd outfought and outthought the greatest empire on earth. But he couldn't stop thinking about that tent, about the gold, about the silk, about how comfortable those Persian robes had looked compared to the rough red cloak of Sparta. The victory at Plataea had saved Greece from Persian conquest. But it couldn't save Pausanias from himself. The man who'd mocked Persian luxury was about to become its greatest victim. The poison of victory was already coursing through his veins, and there was no cure. The war was won. The tragedy was just beginning. The corruption was gradual, like watching someone drown in slow motion. Pausanias, sent abroad on campaigns, stopped wearing Sparta's rough red cloak. Travelers saw him in purple Persian robes. He stopped eating black broth, began dining on elaborate banquets. Worse, he hired Egyptian and Persian bodyguards, refusing to let Greeks approach. The man who'd avenged Leonidas was now cosplaying as the enemy he'd destroyed. Rumours got darker, whispers that Pausanias was writing to Xerxes, offering to deliver Greece for the king's daughter's hand. The saviour had become a traitor. Spartans recalled him, tried him, but acquitted him. No hard evidence. Royal status protected him. He didn't stop. He allegedly stirred up the helots, the slaves he'd commanded at Plataea, promising freedom if they overthrew Sparta. Conspiring with Persia was bad, but arming helots, unforgivable. The ephors set a trap, had a servant hide while Pausanias discussed treason. Evidence secured. The victor of Plataea was now hunted in his own city, defeated not by Persians but by his own ego. Pausanias ran through the streets of Sparta with the ephors closing in. He sprinted into the temple of Athena of the Brazen House, claiming sanctuary. In the ancient world, you couldn't kill a man inside a temple without angering the gods. The ephors arrived at the temple doors and stopped, trapped by their own laws. They couldn't drag him out and couldn't go in with swords, so they came up with a solution that was uniquely, terrifyingly Spartan. If they couldn't touch him, they'd make sure he never left. They ordered the doors bricked up, and here's the detail that breaks your heart. As the Spartans gathered stones to seal the entrance, an old woman walked through the crowd. It was Pausanias' own mother. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for her son's life. She simply picked up a heavy stone, walked to the temple door, and placed it on the threshold in silence. Then she walked away. It was the ultimate rejection, choosing Sparta's honor over her child's life. For days, the hero of Plataea sat in the darkness. No food, no water, just the sound of his own breathing and the smell of incense he could no longer offer. Just before his heart stopped, the Ephors dragged his emaciated body out into the sunlight so he wouldn't die inside and pollute the holy ground. He died a prisoner, a traitor, and a disgrace. This is why we don't make movies about Plataea. The hero becomes the villain. The good guys commit atrocities. Victory leads to corruption and empire. We prefer the beautiful defeat to the ugly victory. We prefer the martyr Leonidas to the conqueror Pausanias. But we must not forget the truth. Thermopylae was a symbol. Plataea was the salvation.